Lagos was a city where dreams clashed with reality, where power and ambition could turn the closest of lovers into strangers. In the heart of the city stood the imposing mansion of Chief Obina and his wife Adaura, one of the most admired couples in high society. Obina was a wealthy businessman whose name commanded respect, while Adaura was known for her grace, beauty, and impeccable social standing. Yet beneath the polished surface of their marriage, cracks had begun to form. Adora had always been a woman of sophistication, deeply invested in her image and the life they had built together. But as the years went by, she grew more detached. Childbirth, something that had been promised but postponed for too long, had become an unspoken point of tension. To maintain her beauty, Adora had insisted on waiting until the time was right. But years had passed, and that time had never come. Obina, on the other hand, had begun to feel the weight of an empty home. His once passionate wife had turned into a woman always too busy, busy with friends, with fashion, with the pursuit of perfection. His nights had become lonely, his affections unreciprocated, and the warmth he once felt in their marriage had faded into something cold and transactional. It was during one of these lonely periods that Ankichi arrived. She was a young woman from the village, hired to manage the house and take care of daily chores. Obina had barely paid her any attention at first. She was just a maid after all, but Ankechi was observant. She noticed the silence between husband and wife, the way Obina spent his evenings alone in the study, the frustration behind his eyes when Adaura barely acknowledged his presence. She began to insert herself subtly into his routine, not in an obvious way, but in small, calculated gestures. A steaming cup of tea placed on his desk without him asking, a gentle good morning, Chief, spoken with warmth, a lingering moment where their eyes met, just a second longer than necessary. Obina, for all his wealth and power, was still a man, and like all men, he was susceptible to attention. At first he brushed it off, but with time he began to notice her more. One evening, after another dinner eaten alone, Obina sat in the living room, rubbing his temples, exhausted from work and the quiet emptiness of the house. And Kichi approached, hesitating slightly before speaking. Chief, should I warm up your food? Madame said she would be back late. Obina exhaled and shook his head. No, thank you. She lingered. Chief, if I may ask, are you okay? That question, so simple, yet so rare. Obina studied her face. Her eyes were filled with genuine concern. It had been a long time since anyone had asked him that. Even longer since Adara had cared enough to notice when something was wrong. I'm fine, he said, but even he didn't believe it. And Kichi didn't press further. Instead, she nodded respectfully and left. But as she walked away, Obina found himself watching her retreating figure longer than he should have, and that was how it began. Days turned into weeks, and Obina found himself more aware of Ankichi's presence in the house. It wasn't that she did anything inappropriate. No, she was careful, always respectful, always keeping the distance expected of a housemaid. But there was something about her that lingered in his mind. The way she smiled when she greeted him, the way she carried out her duties with quiet efficiency, the way she seemed to understand his moods without a single word being spoken. Adara, on the other hand, had become even more distant. She spent her days hopping between charity events, spa appointments, and social gatherings. She hardly noticed Obina's silences anymore, and when she did, she dismissed them as unimportant. One evening, Obina returned home earlier than usual. Adara wasn't home. She had called earlier, saying she had dinner plans with friends. Nkechi was in the kitchen, her hands moving skillfully as she prepared a meal. She looked up in surprise when he entered. Chief, welcome back. I didn't know you'd be home this early. Obina watched as she wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, her expression unreadable. He hadn't intended to come here. In fact, he wasn't sure why he had walked in at all, but the house was too quiet, and for some reason, standing there in the kitchen with Nkechi felt comforting. He leaned against the counter, watching as she resumed cooking. There was something soothing about the way she moved, her actions unhurried, precise. The scent of freshly cooked stew filled the air. That smells good, he said. Nkechi glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. Thank you, Chief. Would you like to eat now? He hesitated. Normally he would have waited for Adara, but what was the point? They rarely ate together anymore. He nodded, and Kechi quickly set a place for him at the kitchen table, something Adara would have never imagined him doing, eating in the kitchen with the help. But as he took a bite, he realized how much he had missed a simple, home cooked meal. As he ate, Onkechi stood nearby, wiping down the counter. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but there was an ease in her presence. At some point, he found himself talking about work, about how exhausting things had been lately. He didn't expect her to understand the intricacies of his business, but she listened, nodding at the right moments, offering quiet words of encouragement. Later that night, as he lay in bed, Obina found himself thinking about Nkechi again. It wasn't lost, not yet, but there was something about her that was starting to fill the empty spaces Adara had left behind. He didn't realize that Nkechi had been waiting for this moment. At first, Adaura didn't notice the change. She was too caught up in her own world, moving through life as though her marriage was unshakable. After all, she was Adaura, the elegant, admired wife of Chief Obina. Who could possibly threaten her position? But slowly small things began to shift. Obina, who had always been indifferent to domestic affairs, suddenly seemed more comfortable at home. He was eating more meals at the house instead of dining out. He was in a better mood, less tense. And most telling of all, he was paying attention to Ankechi. It was subtle, the way his eyes lingered on the maid when she walked past, the way he responded to her greetings with warmth he no longer showed his wife. Adora noticed one evening when she returned from an event earlier than expected. She walked into the living room and found them there. Obina sitting on the couch and Kichi standing nearby, laughing softly at something he had said. It wasn't what they were saying that sent a sharp chill through Adaura's body. It was the way they looked at each other. And Kichi quickly stepped back when she saw Adaura. She lowered her head respectfully and excused herself. Obina barely reacted. Adora stood still, watching Nkechi disappear down the hallway, her mind racing. Was she imagining things? No. She knew the look of a man intrigued by a woman, and she had just seen it in her own husband's eyes. She didn't confront him that night. Instead, she observed, and the more she watched, the more she saw. The way Nkechi suddenly seemed to carry herself with more confidence in the house, as if she knew she had power. The way Obina's eyes followed her when he thought no one was looking. Adara was not a woman to be played for a fool. One evening, as Nkichi passed by, Adora called her name. The girl stopped in her tracks, her body stiff. Come here, Adora said, and Kichi obeyed, her face carefully neutral. Adora studied her. You've been in this house for how long now? Almost a year, Ma. And in that time, I have fed you, clothed you, given you a place to sleep. I trust you have been comfortable. Yes, Ma. And Kichi's voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes, a challenge. Adora leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I hope you are not mistaking my kindness for weakness. I am not blind, Nkichi. Whatever you think you are doing, end it now. And Kichi met her gaze, and for the first time she didn't lower her eyes. Instead, she smiled just a little. Of course, ma, she said before walking away. Adora watched her go, fury burning in her chest. This girl was not just ambitious, she was dangerous, and Adora was not going to let her win. The breaking point came on a night Adora would never forget. She had gone to bed early, but something, maybe instinct, maybe fear, made her wake up in the middle of the night. She got up, her heart pounding as she moved quietly through the house. And then she heard it. Soft voices coming from the study. She crept closer, her breath shallow. Obina's voice low and intimate. Nkechi's laughter, soft and sweet. Adara stood frozen outside the door, and then she heard the worst thing of all. Obina's voice, affectionate, tender. Nkechi, you make me happy. The words felt like a dagger to her chest. She turned and walked away. The next morning, she packed her bags. Obina found her in the bedroom, placing the last of her things into a suitcase. He frowned. What are you doing? What does it look like? She didn't look at him. Adaora, stop this nonsense. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw it, the complete loss in her eyes. It's over, she said. Obina stared at her, as if finally realizing what was happening. Adaora, please. But it was too late. She zipped her suitcase, lifted it, and walked out of the room. And Nkechi, standing just outside the hallway, watched her go, a small smile playing on her lips. She had won, or so she thought. At first, Obina convinced himself that Adara would come back. She was too proud to leave everything behind, but she never returned. And with time, he realized the truth. He had lost her. As for Nkechi, she got what she wanted, at least for a while. She enjoyed the luxuries, the gifts, the status of being close to Obina. But the respect, the admiration that Adora commanded, she never had. People whispered behind her back. The other staff resented her. And Obina, he was never the same. The thrill of the affair faded, and slowly he began to see Nkechi for what she truly was. One day he looked at her and felt nothing. In the end, Adara had been the soul of the home. Without her, everything felt empty. And Nkechi, she had won a man, but she had lost the game. Days after Adaora's departure, the vast emptiness of the mansion gnawed at Obina's soul. The silence in every corner reminded him of what he had lost, and the absence of Adaora, a presence that had once filled the home with warmth and meaning, haunted him at every turn. One rainy afternoon, as the dark clouds wept over Lagos, Obina found himself unable to face the familiar halls of his own home. Instead, he set out on a journey of desperate hope. He would find Adaora and beg her to return. His mind churned with regret and longing as he navigated the crowded streets toward the modest neighborhood where Adaora had taken refuge. When he arrived at her parents' residence, he was met by Adaora's elder sister, who eyed him with a mixture of pity and stern disapproval. Without preamble, Obina spoke of his anguish. I have come to beg her forgiveness, he said, voice heavy with remorse. I was a fool, blind to her love, neglectful of the woman who held our home together. Every moment without her is a reminder of my sins. Her sister's eyes softened briefly before hardening with resolve. Adaura's heart has closed itself off, she explained, for the pain of betrayal cuts deep. But she allowed Obina to wait in the small foyer, hoping that his earnest words might awaken something in her. Hours later, Adaura herself emerged from the modest dwelling, her face a mask of guarded sorrow. Obina stepped forward, his eyes filled with pleading and remorse. Please, Adaora, I implore you to listen, he said softly, taking a tentative step closer. I was lost without you. I was foolish and weak. I now understand that I took your love for granted, that every moment I spent chasing empty comforts has left me hollow. Adaura's gaze was distant, as if she were weighing the sincerity of his words against years of neglect and hurt. I cannot promise that I will forget what I have suffered, she replied, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and deep sorrow. Your words may be drenched in regret now, but how do I know they are not merely the desperate echoes of a man who has tasted loss? Obina's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he continued, I will do anything, change, beg, prove myself every day. Just give me another chance to show you that I can be the husband you deserve. The emptiness in our home, the void in my heart, it all belongs to you. I am nothing without you. For long there was only silence between them, punctuated by the patter of rain on the roof. Adaura studied the anguish in Obina's eyes, the sincerity that belied his previous arrogance. Yet her wounds ran deep, and trust once shattered is not easily pieced together. I do not know if I can ever forget, she admitted, voice low and firm. I do not know if my heart can be mended by words alone. But know this, your plea does not erase the past. You must prove to me every day that you understand the value of what we once had. Obina nodded, swallowing hard as he vowed silently to give everything to earn back the love he had so carelessly jeopardized. In that rain-soaked moment, as Adaura turned away slowly, Obina understood that this was not a surrender born of weakness, but a plea, a final hope that redemption was still within reach. He left the modest house that day with nothing but his remorse and a fragile hope that someday Adara might find it in her heart to forgive. Yet as he walked away, every step felt heavier than the last, a constant reminder that some wounds, once inflicted, would forever define the journey toward redemption.